Well, it's the end of January in 2023, and the weather is sadly back to being terrible again. Just par for the course here at the moment. But it's a good excuse to make a best of video, or in this case, it's really favourite of, but best of 2022 is probably what I've put in the thumbnail because it's nice and symmetrical, and favourite is a very long word to fit into a stylish thumbnail. So these are really my favourite photos of 2022. I'm going to put 10 in, and they might not all be technically amazing, but they might be of an interesting species that I've never photographed before. So here we go. 10 photos that I kind of like, which is kind of the point, really, isn't it? So first up is a grass snake, and these are the most common snakes here in the UK. They are kind of still quite rare to see though, because they tend to be in very dense foliage areas. This one was actually pointed out to me by two photographers who had just spotted it swimming up the river, and it was trying to get through a culvert, and it gotten tired out, so it sat off to the side, and that's when I managed to sneak one good frame through the foliage of its face, and it's actually covered in small mites on its head, kind of interestingly. But as this is my only photo of a snake that I've ever gotten, it goes in my list of favourite photos from last year. So at number 9, we have a photo of a sparrow in the rain, and it's not the world's most exciting species or even the most exciting photograph, but I particularly love photographing in the rain, and I particularly like showing animals in their habitats, and this was a particularly nice day for photography because the rain was sort of intermittent and kind of globby, so it looks good. And I caught the bird moving around quite a lot in the bush, in the tree, and I really like this photograph. Now at number 8 we have a photograph that's quite bizarre for me. I don't do much by way of macro photography, and I wouldn't really call this macro photography because I took this with 300mm prime lens on the OM-1, which is effectively a 600mm lens. But one of the advantages of the Micro Four Thirds system is that it has a very short minimum focus distance of about 1.4 meters. So you do actually get very good magnification on it for small subjects. This was an interesting photo to take. So there's a couple of tricks or a couple of tips if you do try to photograph something like this. One, pick an insect that sits still. A hoverfly does hover. It's in the name, I guess. The other one is to rack your focus back to the minimum focus distance between shots, because cameras prefer going from near to far, and they are much more likely to be able to lock onto it. The camera was very regularly going past the hoverfly and focusing on the wall behind it. So between each shot, I pulled it back to minimum and used the, I think the all setting on the AF points to just try and get it on the closest thing possible, which was the hoverfly. I got a couple of good photos out of this, but I particularly like this one because it has blurry wings, but a very sharp body, and he's striking a funky pose. What's not to like? In 7th place, we have this photo of 3 spotted redshanks. These are quite rare birds over this way, and I took this photo at Slimbridge Wetland Centre. They were pointed out to me by somebody else. I would almost certainly not have identified them as being different from other redshanks because they do look quite similar, in all honesty. But I quite like this photo because the 3 birds lined up so nicely. They've got a nice spacing between them. They are pretty much equally spaced. They've got similar poses but slightly different. They're making what looks to be eye contact with the camera. I wish the angle was a bit lower, but you can't really do that at a lot of modern wildlife reserves in the UK. The heights tend to be set quite high. So yeah, I just kind of like this one because the birds themselves were interesting, and I do like the poses. Now, number 6 is frustratingly what might be technically my best photograph that I have ever taken, in that it was exceptionally difficult to take, and it's of a really interesting behaviour. and I spent a really long time trying to take this photo. But the downside is that because of the light levels where it was and the changing light levels, this photo was taken at ISO 25600 on the OM-1, and the original file that came out of it looked like this, which is not the best. So over time, I have managed to claw this back and hopefully restore it to a point where I can at least show the image and not feel that it looks particularly weird. The problem with this and with denoising this is that in doing so, a lot of software has made the water look particularly weird and paint-like. However, a recent update to Topaz Photo AI has meant that it actually has done a very good job this time around, and it's not got a huge amount of color bleed from the bird's feathers either. And so with reference shots of a different shot that had better lighting around the same time, I have brought the color back into the photo that was sorely missing. And I'm now at the point where I'm kind of happy with it. It's not perfect because it was such a noisy photograph, but it means that I can now be content and I can look at this and get enjoyment from looking at this photograph. As to what's going on in the photograph, this is a grey wagtail, and they were darting just over the surface of the water, trying to catch mayflies and similar insects like that as they bounced up and down on top of the water. Every now and then, this wagtail in particular would sort of flap up and pause in midair with its wings out and its tail out, and I probably took 5,000 shots trying to get this photograph. But I don't regret it. So we're about halfway now, and it's time for a subject change. Rather than some wildlife, this is a landscape photo. I took this in Switzerland. This is near the summit of Pilatus, just outside of Lucerne. This holds some interesting memories for me because I effectively got led up the wrong route of Pilatus, and it was extremely challenging for me as somebody who has problems with my knees. And this was after multiple hours of struggling to get up to this point, and there is really no way back down unless you throw yourself off or you get a helicopter ride. This was taken by the church that's actually on this part of the mountain. It's got to be about 1,800 meters up in the air, on the mountain, obviously not floating. And this is facing the rock face that you then have to climb up and around to get to the final peak of Pilatus Kulm, which is where there's a hotel at the top, which is very anticlimactic. And this next photo is taken from 45 minutes further up. Well, 45 minutes for me, because I was pretty dead by this point. And this is my favourite photo from my Switzerland trip because of the array of heights it has in it. It's a very dramatic photograph. You can sort of see just how high up you are and the different levels there are to it. If you're looking sort of in the centre right of the photograph, you can see one of the gondola stations that brought us about halfway up the overall height of the mountain. It's very gradual to a certain point, and then it's very steep for the last sort of 800 or something meters, I think, is a very steep ascent, which is what we came up. But you can see back to that, and then even further in the distance, you can actually see part of Lucerne behind it. I really like the depth of this photograph. It's got a lot going on in it. It's quite a busy photograph, but there's a lot to see, and therefore it's my favourite of the trip. So, top 3. And in third place is this photo of a young blue tit. This was taken in some stunning morning light at Cosmiston Lakes in South Wales. And I just love his jaunty little strut as he's picked a caterpillar off the top of these flowers. I like the fact that he's a bit scruffy, but he's so jaunty. It's got something to it. I really like this photograph. It's a little bit annoying that there's a blade of grass that went across his tail, but I had seconds to react on this, and even though I have other shots where his tail wasn't obscured slightly by a blade of grass. This is the best photo. This is the nicest photo, and it's got the most going on in it. Now, the competition between second and first place on this I find very difficult because I love this second place photo, but not quite as much as the one in first place. So in second place is a picture of a swallow. This swallow was perched on a wire fence at Slimbridge. It was in a very nice patch of sunlight with a huge distance to the fields behind it. So I've got a huge amount of background separation on this. I love the colour in this photograph. I love how clean it is. And in true photo awards fashion, I have made this the thumbnail of this video. Like they do in all photography awards, the first place one is never the photo that gets put on any of the books or on any of the posters. I spent 20 minutes trying to take a photo of this swallow taking off. I stood there for 20 minutes holding my camera up, because I don't usually use a tripod. And when my arms eventually gave out, that's when he took off. So I don't have a frame of him taking off, but I do have this. And in some ways, it's probably better. I love the fact that you've got his beak fully open. He's giving a yawn. He's scratching the side of his head. I really like this photograph, but not quite as much as I love my first place photograph. This is my favourite photograph of mine from 2022. It's of a reed warbler at Cosmiston Lakes. It was the most stunning morning light I have ever experienced when out photographing. It was 5 a.m. The sun was behind a very wispy cloud, very thin cloud, and it was bright pink. The whole morning had absolutely stunning light, and this photograph is just so pleasing to look at for me. The bird is crisp, obviously, but the depth from the leaves, from the reeds, I love the memories of that morning as well, and this photo reminds me of that. There were no other people there at all. There were no joggers, there were no dog walkers, and it was just me and these reed warblers. They didn't seem to mind me that much. They were going around in circles hunting, teaching their young to hunt, and they were perching occasionally on the dried reeds in amongst all of the greenery. And I just love the colours and the light in this photograph. It's the most perfect light for photography. And that's why it's my favourite photo that I took in 2022. Well, do post in the comments what your favourite photos were, either of the ones I've shown here, or indeed your own photographs. I would be very interested in seeing them. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time.